Silence is not just the absence of words. It is a message in itself, a powerful force that speaks louder than anything you could ever say. When you go silent, when you stop reaching out, when you no longer give the same level of attention she had grown accustomed to, something shifts inside her. She notices, she feels it, she begins to wonder. And that wondering is exactly what keeps you on her mind long after the silence begins. Women, like men, thrive on patterns and routines. When she gets used to your presence, your texts, your calls, your laughter, or even just the comfort of knowing you're always there, her mind forms an expectation. She begins to assume that you will always be available, that your attention is something she doesn't need to think twice about. But the moment you disrupt that pattern, the moment you withdraw your energy, her mind can't help but search for an explanation. Suddenly, she's asking herself questions she never bothered to ask before. Why hasn't he called? Why did he stop checking in? Did I do something wrong? Has he moved on? That silence becomes the trigger for 1,000 thoughts she cannot escape. Curiosity is a natural human response to uncertainty, and silence creates the greatest uncertainty of all. Words provide answers, but silence leaves blanks that our imagination races to fill. And here's the truth. The imagination is often far more powerful than reality. The less you reveal, the more her mind begins to create stories about you, stories that keep you alive in her head even when you are no longer speaking. That curiosity pulls at her, keeps her wondering about your life, your feelings, and your intentions. It makes you harder to forget because you become an unsolved puzzle in her mind. The fascinating thing about silence is that it forces her to focus on you without you having to do anything at all. If you are constantly talking, explaining, or proving your worth, she might get used to it and dismiss it. But when you stop, your absence grows louder than your presence ever was. She feels the lack of your voice, the missing energy, and the shift in the connection. And that absence demands her attention. It lingers in her thoughts, reminding her of the space you once filled. Another reason silence is so powerful is because it challenges her expectations of control. When someone feels secure in your presence, they may believe they hold the upper hand, that no matter what they do, you'll always be there, always chasing, always giving. But silence disrupts that sense of control. It sends a subtle but undeniable message. You are not dependent on her validation. You are not desperate for her attention. And you are willing to walk away from anything that no longer values you. That disruption unsettles her because it forces her to confront the possibility that she may have lost something she thought was guaranteed. And that thought alone is enough to keep you living in her mind. Silence also creates mystery, and mystery is magnetic. In a world where most people over-explain, overshare, and constantly seek attention, your silence makes you different. It makes her wonder what you're thinking, what you're doing, and what has caused the sudden shift. And because she doesn't have answers, she keeps going back to those thoughts, replaying scenarios in her head, trying to decode your silence. That mystery makes you unforgettable because people always want to know what they can't easily have access to. What makes this even more powerful is that silence gives her no closure. Words can end things. Explanations can tie up loose ends, but silence leaves questions open. And those open questions replay in her mind over and over again. Instead of moving on, she's stuck, reflecting, analyzing, and searching for meaning. She may even try to distract herself, but deep down, her thoughts will circle back to the same unanswered questions about you. That is why silence is so powerful. It doesn't just stop communication, it rewrites the dynamic. It forces her to think, to feel, to question, and to realize things she never would have noticed if you had kept talking. And it's in that silence that you become unforgettable, not because of what you said, but because of what you chose not to say. That is why after silence, she can't stop thinking about you. When you go silent, you force her to confront something she may not have realized before, the depth of the space you actually occupied in her life. People often underestimate presence until it's gone. It's not always about the grand gestures, the long conversations, or the moments of intensity. It's about the little consistencies that build comfort and stability over time. Maybe it was the good morning text, the way you always checked in to see how her day was, the inside jokes, or even the subtle reassurance that you were always just one call away. When all of that disappears, it's not just silence, it's a void. And human beings naturally feel the weight of absence far more than they appreciate presence. Psychologists have often said that the brain registers loss more intensely than gain. What this means is she may not have fully noticed or valued what you were giving while you were giving it, but the second you stop, the lack hits her much harder than the consistency ever did. Silence makes her realize the energy you brought into her world, the attention, the care, the reassurance, even the little sparks of excitement that came from knowing you were thinking about her. By withdrawing, you're not punishing her. You're simply allowing her to feel the natural consequence of what it's like without you. That realization is what begins to keep you in her thoughts, because now, instead of taking you for granted, she's forced to acknowledge the contrast between life with you and life without you. The silence also brings her face to face with herself. When you are communicating all the time, she could easily distract herself with your words, your presence, and your attention. But when that's gone, she has no choice but to sit with her own thoughts. And often, those thoughts turn inward. Why did he stop reaching out? Did I push him away? Did I misread his interest? Have I lost something valuable? These self-directed questions create reflection, and reflection is powerful. It forces her to see her role in the dynamic, something she may have ignored or overlooked when you were always available. Your silence becomes the mirror she can't avoid, making her realize things about both you and herself. And let's be clear, this realization doesn't happen immediately. At first, she may brush it off, assume you're just busy, or even try to act like she doesn't notice. But the longer the silence stretches, the more undeniable it becomes. Slowly, her curiosity turns to concern, and concern turns to a sense of loss. That timeline of emotions is exactly what keeps her thinking about you, because silence doesn't give her the closure to file you away neatly in her mind. Instead, it lingers, reminding her every day that something she once had is no longer there. What makes this process even more intense is the fact that silence creates contrast with other men. Let's face it, most men chase when ignored. They blow up her phone, demand answers, try to win her back with excessive effort. And in doing so, they confirm that they are replaceable, predictable, and easy to control. But when you remain silent, you separate yourself from that category. You show restraint. You show self-respect. You show that your world doesn't revolve around her validation. That kind of behavior shocks her, because it's not what she's used to seeing. It sets you apart in her mind and makes her realize he's different. That uniqueness alone ensures she can't just forget you, because the mind is always drawn to what breaks the norm. The beauty of silence is that it speaks without speaking. It communicates confidence, strength, and independence in a way words never could. It tells her that you value yourself enough not to chase. It shows her that you're not afraid of being alone. And it subtly makes her confront whether or not she truly valued what she had when she had it. That's why your silence isn't just an absence. It's a message, and it's a message that keeps echoing in her mind long after you've stopped talking. That is why, after silence, she realizes the depth of your presence and can't stop thinking about you. When you choose silence, you unknowingly create a paradox that works in your favor. The less you say, the more she imagines. Human nature is wired this way. When there's a lack of information, the mind fills the gap with stories, possibilities, and scenarios. And when it comes to relationships, silence is never just silence. To her, it becomes a puzzle, a mystery, something she feels compelled to decode. She may start wondering, is he over me? Is he seeing someone else? Has he stopped caring? Or is he waiting for me to make the move? Every unanswered question plays on repeat in her head. And the more unanswered questions she has, the more you occupy her thoughts. This psychological effect is powerful because uncertainty is far more captivating than clarity. When everything is predictable, people lose interest quickly. But when there's a mystery, the curiosity keeps them hooked. By going silent, you create the very mystery that fuels her thoughts about you. She has no script to follow, no certainty to lean on, and that lack of control makes her replay moments in her mind trying to figure out where she stands. She remembers the last conversation you had, the last look you gave her, the way you acted before you went silent. She reanalyzes everything over and over because silence magnifies what once seemed ordinary. This is why many men misunderstand the value of pulling back. They think if they don't constantly remind her of their presence, she'll forget them. But the truth is the opposite. The mind doesn't forget absence. It obsesses over it. Think about it. When someone pulls away, you naturally begin to question why. And in those moments, the silence does more work than 1,000 words ever could. It creates an emotional vacuum, and that vacuum is filled with her thoughts of you. There's another layer to this. Silence awakens her competitive nature. If she was used to being the center of attention, to being chased, to feeling like she had you wrapped around her finger, your silence disrupts that narrative. Suddenly, she's no longer sure where she stands in your world. That uncertainty challenges her ego, and now she has something to prove. Not to you, but to herself. She starts thinking, why isn't he reaching out? Does he not miss me? Did I misjudge his feelings? That inner questioning quickly becomes an obsession because it touches on her deepest insecurities. Being forgotten, being replaceable, or losing someone who once valued her. And here's where silence truly flips the script. When she begins to think about you this way, it's no longer about what you're saying or doing. It's about the effect you have without even trying. She realizes that your silence has power. It carries weight. It forces her to reflect not only on you, but also on herself. And in doing so, it makes her crave what she doesn't have. It's human nature to want what's uncertain, to long for what's just out of reach. By holding back, you become that unreachable thing she can't stop thinking about. Most importantly, silence also creates contrast with noise. Think about how loud the world is today. Social media notifications, constant texting, distractions at every corner. When you step away from that noise and give her nothing, your absence stands out even more. She notices it, she feels it, and she thinks about it constantly because in a world full of attention, you're the one who chose not to give it. That choice makes her wonder, and that wondering keeps you alive in her thoughts. And remember, this is not about manipulation, it's about self-respect. Silence isn't a game you play to trick her into missing you. It's about reclaiming your energy, focusing on yourself, and letting her see what life is like when you're no longer at her fingertips. And ironically, it's in that space of silence where she begins to value what she once overlooked, because now the mystery of your absence is louder than your presence ever was. That is why silence makes her imagination run wild and ensures she can't stop thinking about you. When you go silent, one of the most powerful things that happens is that she is forced to confront what life looks like without you. In the moments when you were available, when you were texting, calling, or giving her attention, she had the luxury of knowing exactly where she stood with you. She could take that comfort for granted because you were always there to provide it. But silence takes away that comfort. It leaves her with space to think, space to reflect, and most importantly, space to feel the absence of your presence. That absence becomes a mirror showing her not only how much she notices you're gone, but also how much she truly valued what you brought into her life. And this reflection is not always immediate. At first, she may brush it off, convincing herself that your silence doesn't matter or that she doesn't care. But the truth is, the longer the silence lingers, the louder the thoughts in her head become. It's in that quiet that she begins to remember the small things, the way you made her laugh, the way you supported her, the unique energy you carried into her life. These memories surface because silence allows them to breathe. When you're no longer feeding her with constant contact, her mind begins feeding itself with recollections of you, and instead of being neutral, those recollections often take on more weight, more emotion, because they are tied to a sense of loss. This is where silence becomes a teacher. It teaches her that your presence wasn't just ordinary background noise, it was something meaningful. In fact, many times people only realize the depth of someone's value when that value is removed. When she feels that gap, when she notices the emptiness where your energy used to be, she is confronted with a reality she may not have wanted to face. Life without you isn't as fulfilling as she thought it would be. That realization hits differently because it doesn't come from you convincing her with words, it comes from her own heart convincing her through experience. There's also something deeply psychological about this. Silence is often associated with strength and self-control. When you choose not to chase, not to explain yourself, not to beg for attention, it communicates volumes about your confidence and self-respect. She begins to see that you are not dependent on her reactions, her validation, or her approval. And paradoxically, that independence makes her value you even more. Why? Because people are naturally drawn to what they cannot easily control. Your silence signals that you are not under her influence, and that forces her to respect you on a different level. Respect and reflection go hand in hand. When she respects your ability to step back, she also reflects on why you even chose to do so in the first place. What you also need to understand is that reflection has the power to soften her ego. Many times a woman may not reach out because of pride or because she wants to see how much you'll chase her, but silence disrupts that dynamic. It makes her question whether her pride is worth the distance, whether holding back is really giving her the satisfaction she thought it would. In the quiet, she begins to wrestle with her emotion. She wonders if she pushed too far, if she underestimated your worth, if she let her ego overshadow what could have been a deeper connection. That inner conflict is exactly what makes her think about you constantly, even if she never admits it out loud. And here's the most powerful part. Silence shifts the burden of thought. When you're silent, you're not sitting there trying to figure out what she's doing or what she's thinking. Instead, she's the one left replaying conversations, analyzing your actions, and wondering about your intentions. She carries the weight of those unanswered questions, and with each passing day, the reflection becomes heavier. Silence flips the script. Suddenly, she's the one doing all the emotional labor while you stand firm in your detachment. So in the end, silence isn't just about withholding words, it's about creating the conditions where she has no choice but to reflect. And reflection, when paired with absence, has a way of magnifying your importance in her mind. The more she thinks about what she's lost, the harder it becomes for her to escape the truth. You mattered more than she realized. That is why silence forces her into deep reflection and ensures you remain on her mind long after you've stopped speaking.